I never thought I would become homeless in America. Not in the country everyone calls the land of opportunity. But 3 years ago, that's exactly where I was. Homeless. Broke. Completely lost. My name is Daniel, and I was 27 years old when my entire life collapsed in a matter of weeks. I grew up believing the same story most Americans grow up hearing. Work hard, stay disciplined, and eventually things will work out. For most of my 20s, I actually believed that was true. I had a small apartment in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place with old carpet and a noisy air conditioner that rattled every summer. But it was mine. I had a stable warehouse job, 40 hours a week, sometimes overtime. Enough money to pay rent, buy groceries, and occasionally go out for burgers with friends on weekends. Life wasn't exciting, but it felt safe, predictable. And honestly, I liked it that way. Because when you grow up in a family that struggles with money, stability feels like success. My dad worked construction his entire life. My mom cleaned houses. They never had savings. Every unexpected bill was a crisis. So when I finally had a steady paycheck, I promised myself one thing. I would never end up broke like that. But life has a strange sense of humor, because the moment you think you're safe, that's usually when everything falls apart. It started with a single email on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact moment. I was halfway through my coffee break at the warehouse when my phone buzzed. The subject line read, "Company Restructuring Update." At first, I didn't think much about it. Big companies send those kinds of emails all the time. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. The company was shutting down our entire division, effective immediately. Just like that, my job was gone. No warning, no transition period, just a small severance check and a polite thank you for your service. I walked back onto the warehouse floor feeling numb. The machines were still running. Boxes were still moving down the conveyor belts. But in my mind, everything had already stopped. All I could think about was rent, bills, groceries, car payments. Things that used to feel manageable suddenly looked like mountains. I told myself not to panic. I still had some savings, about 3 months' worth of expenses. Plenty of time to find another job, I said to myself. At least, that's what I believed at the time. At first, I treated unemployment like a short break. I updated my resume, applied to a few warehouses, maybe 10 applications the first week. I figured someone would call quickly. After all, I had experience, good attendance, no problems with supervisors. But the calls never came. Week 2 passed, then week 3. My savings slowly started shrinking. Rent was still due, electric bill, gas, insurance. Money that once felt like security now felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I started applying everywhere: retail stores, delivery companies, construction sites, even fast food restaurants. Some places never replied. Some sent automated rejection emails. A few scheduled interviews, then disappeared. Each rejection felt heavier than the last. At night, I would sit in my apartment staring at the ceiling, doing the math in my head. How many weeks do I have left? How long until the money runs out? That's when the fear really started creeping in, because for the first time in my life, I realized something terrifying. Hard work doesn't always guarantee stability. By the second month, reality hit me hard. My savings were almost gone. I stopped ordering food, stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Every dollar suddenly mattered. One night, I sat at my small kitchen table with a calculator. Rent, utilities, gas, groceries. The numbers didn't work anymore, no matter how I moved them around. I remember staring at the final total and feeling this heavy silence in my chest. I had maybe 2 weeks left before everything collapsed. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept racing. What happens if I can't pay rent? Where do I go? Who do I ask for help? The next morning, I checked my email again. More rejection messages. Same cold sentences. Thank you for applying. Unfortunately, we have moved forward with other candidates. I closed my laptop slowly, and for the first time in years, I felt completely lost, like the ground under my life had suddenly disappeared. The eviction notice came on a quiet Tuesday morning. It was taped to my apartment door, bright white paper, bold black letters. I stood there staring at it for a long time, like maybe if I didn't move, it would disappear. But it didn't. I peeled it off slowly and read every word. You have 7 days to vacate the property. 7 days. That was all the time I had left. My chest felt tight. My hands were shaking. I walked back inside and sat on the couch. Everything around me suddenly looked different. The small table, the old TV, the kitchen counter. It was the place I called home, and now it was slipping away. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my family. Pride is a strange thing. Even when life is falling apart, you still try to look like everything is fine. But deep down inside, I knew something had to change, because in 7 days, I would have nowhere to go. 7 days passed faster than I ever imagined. I packed everything I owned into 2 bags, clothes, a laptop, some notebooks, and a few memories I couldn't throw away. The rest, I left behind. That afternoon, I locked the apartment door for the last time. I remember standing in the hallway, holding my bags, feeling completely empty. No plan, no direction, just silence. I walked down the stairs slowly and stepped outside. The air felt colder than usual. My car was parked across the street. That car was now my only shelter. I placed the bags in the back seat and sat behind the wheel. For a few minutes, I didn't move. I just stared through the windshield at the busy street. People walking, cars passing, everyone going somewhere. Everyone had a place to go, except me. That night, I slept in my car for the first time, and I realized something painful. Rock bottom isn't a place, it's a feeling. The first night in my car was the longest night of my life. I parked in a quiet corner of a Walmart parking lot. I had heard people sometimes slept there, so I hoped no one would bother me. I pushed the driver's seat back as far as it could go, but it was still uncomfortable. My neck hurt, my back hurt, and sleep barely came. Every little sound woke me up. A car door, footsteps, a shopping cart rolling across the pavement. Around 3 a.m., I just gave up trying to sleep. I sat up and looked around the empty parking lot. Streetlights glowing, cold air creeping through the windows, and a strange silence everywhere. That was the moment it really hit me. I wasn't just struggling anymore. I was homeless. Saying that word inside my head hurt more than anything. Homeless. Just a few months earlier, I had an apartment, a normal routine, a sense of control. Now I was brushing my teeth in a gas station bathroom, trying to look normal, trying to hide a life that had completely fallen apart.
The days that followed were a blur of survival. I washed up in public restrooms, ate cheap fast food, and tried to find places to park where I wouldn't be noticed. Every interaction felt like walking on a tightrope. The cashier giving me a look, someone noticing me sleeping in my car, even friends texting, asking why I hadn't returned calls. I lied, told them I was busy, told them work was hectic. I couldn't admit the truth, not yet. Pride dies slowly, but hunger doesn't wait. By the 3rd day, I realized I needed a plan, even a tiny plan. I couldn't live like this forever. So I pulled out my phone and started searching. Shelters, soup kitchens, community centers, anything that could keep me alive. The first step toward climbing out is admitting you need help. At the shelter, everything felt foreign. The smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with wet blankets. People whispered to each other in corners. Some laughed, some cried, some just stared at the walls, lost in thought. I checked in at the front desk and got assigned a small cot in a crowded room. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over my head. That first night lying there, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my old life, my apartment, my friends, my job, and the shame of being here. I hadn't imagined this for myself. No one does. But as I stared at the ceiling, I promised myself something. This wouldn't define me. I wouldn't stay here forever. It was just a step, a hard, painful, humiliating step, but a step nonetheless.
The next morning, I joined the breakfast line. Eggs, toast, and a weak cup of coffee. Not gourmet by any means, but it filled the stomach. I sat at the end of a long table with strangers who were all fighting their own battles. Some looked older than they were. Some looked younger, almost lost. We didn't talk much at first. Silence hung heavy in the air. Then a man next to me cracked a small joke about the coffee. A few people laughed. The tension eased a little. For the first time in days, I smiled. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it reminded me that life could still have light, even in the darkest moments. And that morning, I made another promise to myself. I would find a way out. I would climb back. I would survive. After breakfast, I headed to the public library. It became my second home, a place with warmth, electricity, and, most importantly, Wi-Fi. I started researching jobs more seriously. Resume tips, interview strategies, companies that were hiring immediately. Every click on the keyboard felt like a small victory. It reminded me I still had control over something, even if it was tiny. I also started reading personal finance articles, how to stretch every dollar, how to save when you barely had any, how to rebuild credit. Each tip felt like a lifeline. I scribbled notes in a notebook I kept in my bag. This was my blueprint, my plan to escape, and I clung to it like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to hope. Days turned into weeks, and the library became my safe haven. I spent hours there every day, learning, searching, applying. The staff started to recognize me. A kind woman named Linda even offered me extra paper and pens when she noticed my supplies were running low. Her small gestures mattered more than she could know. One afternoon, I stumbled upon a job posting for a delivery driver. No experience required, flexible hours, paid weekly. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't a career, but it was a start. I printed the application and filled it out carefully. Every word mattered. Every sentence was a chance to change the trajectory of my life. I submitted it that same day and waited. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. A few days later, I got the call. The manager on the other end sounded rushed but polite. "Can you start tomorrow morning?" My heart raced. "Absolutely," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That night, I barely slept. I went over the route in my head, the deliveries, the map, the schedule. I told myself this was more than just a job. It was the first rung of the ladder. The next morning, I arrived early. They handed me a uniform and a route list. The sun was just rising, casting light over the quiet streets. As I drove my first deliveries, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. For the first time in a long while, I felt capable, even if it was just for one small step.
The first week on the job was brutal. Early mornings, long hours, heavy packages, unfamiliar streets. I drove from dawn until dusk, barely stopping except for gas and a quick snack. My body ached, my back hurt, my hands blistered. But every night, when I parked the delivery van and counted my tips, I felt a small victory.
I was earning, I was surviving, and more importantly, I was moving forward. One evening, I sat in my car after work, exhausted but determined. I opened my notebook and wrote down a plan. Save every dollar, avoid unnecessary expenses, keep applying for better opportunities. It was rough, it was uncomfortable, but I finally felt the tiniest glimmer of control over my life again. By the second month, I began to see small progress. I found a cheap storage unit for my belongings. It wasn't much, but it meant my life didn't have to fit entirely in my car anymore. I cooked simple meals at a friend's apartment when they offered, trying to save every cent. Every small choice felt monumental. Every decision mattered. One night, I sat alone on a park bench, staring at the city lights. I realized something important. I had survived rock bottom. I had faced homelessness. I had faced rejection, hunger, and shame, and I was still standing. It was exhausting, yes, but it was proof. Proof that I could climb back up. Proof that even the darkest night eventually ends with a sunrise. Around this time, I also started volunteering at a local community kitchen. At first, it was just to have a warm meal and a place to shower, but soon it became something more. Helping others reminded me that life wasn't just about surviving, it was about connection. The people there were struggling too. Some had lost jobs, some had lost homes, some were battling addiction or illness. But everyone had a story. Every smile, every thank you, every conversation reminded me that I wasn't alone. It gave me perspective, and it ignited a new fire inside me. If I could lift someone else, even a little, maybe I could lift myself too. It was a small step, but it mattered more than I could explain.
Over the next few months, I settled into a routine. I paid off small debts, saved a little every week, even treated myself to a proper meal at a diner now and then. It felt surreal. I went from sleeping in a car to having a modest apartment again. But the experience had changed me. I was more cautious with money, more aware of how fragile stability can be. I also became more compassionate. I volunteered at the shelter whenever I could. I donated small amounts to food banks, and I shared my story with anyone who would listen. Because surviving rock bottom isn't just about yourself. It's about learning, growing, and lifting others as you climb. Then came the moment that truly tested me. A close friend, someone I trusted completely, betrayed me. They took advantage of my trust and a loan I had given them. It was more than money. It was the principle. I felt anger, hurt, and disbelief all at once. For a moment, I thought of giving up, of retreating into the safety of my apartment and ignoring the world. But then I remembered the nights in my car, the hunger, the fear, the loneliness. I realized if I had survived that, I could survive this too. I chose not to lash out. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my boundaries, on protecting my hard-earned stability. And slowly, I began to heal from the sting of betrayal. I learned that resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about protecting your peace too. Around this time, I also decided to take a small step toward my dream. I had always wanted to start a small business, even when life felt impossible. Now I had a stable job and some savings. I began brainstorming ideas late at night, scribbling notes in my notebook. Coffee cups piled up around me. I researched markets, customers, and products. I reached out to mentors and read every article I could find. Every idea was tested in my mind. Every plan was written down, revised, and written again. It wasn't easy, it wasn't glamorous, but each small action felt like reclaiming a part of my life I thought I had lost forever. I realized that surviving was one thing, but building something lasting, that was a new challenge entirely.
The first prototype of my business idea was simple. I didn't have funds for a fancy setup, just a laptop, a basic website, and determination. I launched it quietly, without telling many people. The first few days were slow, almost painfully slow. Orders trickled in, maybe one or two a day. I celebrated every single one like it was a victory, because it was. Each sale meant someone believed in me, even a little. Each positive message from a customer reminded me that I had value, that my ideas could make an impact. I kept improving the website, learning marketing strategies online, and experimenting with small ads. Step by step, I was slowly building a foundation, a future that didn't just survive, but could thrive. By the 6th-month mark, my little business was starting to grow. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I had traction. People were noticing my products. Returning customers left positive reviews. I reinvested every dollar I could spare, bought better packaging, improved shipping times, and slowly I felt a sense of pride that I hadn't felt in years. The journey from sleeping in my car to building something that mattered was surreal. I remembered those nights of despair, the hunger, the fear, the shame, and I realized each step forward wasn't just about success, it was about reclaiming my identity, my dignity, and proving, first to myself, that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. Around this time, I also started sharing my story publicly, not for attention, not for pity, but to inspire. I wrote blog posts, shared videos, and spoke at small local events. I wanted people to know that rock bottom isn't the end, that even in the darkest moments, you can start climbing again. I received messages from strangers telling me my story gave them hope. People who had lost jobs, people struggling with debt, people facing eviction. They thanked me for showing them that it was possible to rise again. And every message reminded me why I had started sharing my journey. Because survival is powerful, but helping others survive, thrive, and rebuild, that's transformative.
As my business continued to grow, I faced new challenges. Scaling up meant dealing with more customers, bigger orders, and unexpected problems. Mistakes happened. Shipments got delayed. Some products were damaged in transit. I felt the familiar sting of failure creeping back. But this time, I handled it differently. I apologized to customers promptly. I learned from each mistake. I adapted my processes. Every challenge became a lesson. Every setback became fuel. I realized that resilience wasn't just about surviving homelessness or betrayal. It was about navigating success, staying humble, and continuing to grow even when things got hard. One evening, after closing my laptop and counting the day's sales, I sat back and reflected. I had come so far from those nights sleeping in my car, from the shame and fear of being homeless, from the uncertainty of whether I'd ever eat a proper meal again. I thought about all the people who had helped me along the way, the shelter staff, the librarians, the friends who offered a hand when I had nothing. And I realized something important. Success isn't just about money or recognition. It's about growth, perseverance, and the people you touch along the way. I felt grateful, and for the first time, truly proud, not just of surviving, but of becoming someone I could respect. By the end of the first year, my business was steady. I could pay my bills on time. I had a small savings account, and I even began thinking about future investments. But more importantly, I had regained confidence. Confidence I had lost during the months of uncertainty and fear. I could walk into any room without hiding my story. I could talk about my struggles openly, and people listened. I realized my journey had given me a voice I could use to motivate, inspire, and guide others. And every time I shared a part of my story, I reminded myself of the path I had walked, the hardships, the betrayals, the small victories that added up.
Around this time, I also started mentoring others who were struggling, formerly homeless individuals, recent immigrants, and young people trying to find their way. I shared what I had learned about budgeting, job hunting, and resilience. I taught them how to set small goals and celebrate every tiny achievement. It was rewarding beyond words. Watching someone take their first steps toward stability reminded me of my own journey. Every success story, no matter how small, felt like a victory. And I realized that giving back wasn't just charity, it was an essential part of my healing and growth. It made me feel connected. It made my struggles feel purposeful. It gave my life meaning beyond mere survival. By now, I had learned to embrace the uncertainty of life. I still faced challenges, unexpected expenses, slow sales, and occasional self-doubt. But I no longer feared them. Each obstacle reminded me of the strength I had discovered within myself. I knew I could endure hardship. I knew I could adapt. And most importantly, I knew I could rise again, no matter how hard I fell. Looking back, I realized that my journey from homelessness to stability wasn't just about money or jobs. It was about discovering resilience, courage, and self-worth. And as I prepared for the next chapter, I felt ready. Ready to grow, ready to thrive, and ready to turn my story into a legacy. Around this time, an opportunity came that I never expected. A small local magazine reached out after reading my story online. They wanted to feature me in an article about overcoming adversity. I was nervous. Public attention was new territory, but I agreed. The interview lasted for hours. I spoke openly about my homelessness, my struggles, and the slow climb back to stability. I shared the lessons I had learned, the mistakes I had made, and the small victories that kept me going. When the article was published, the response was overwhelming. Emails, messages, and calls poured in from people who related to my story. For the first time, I realized my experience could inspire a broader audience, beyond just my immediate circle. The publicity opened doors I hadn't imagined. Small business owners reached out for advice. Local organizations invited me to speak at events. I began to see that my journey, painful as it was, had given me credibility and perspective. I could offer guidance because I had truly experienced struggle, and the gratitude I received from others fueled me further. Every conversation, every handshake, every story shared reminded me that my past was not a burden, it was an asset. I learned to use my voice strategically, to inspire, to mentor, to connect with people who were looking for hope in their own lives. And with each opportunity, my confidence grew. Around this period, I also began exploring new skills. I took online courses in marketing, finance, and leadership. Late nights were spent watching tutorials, reading books, and practicing what I learned. I knew that knowledge would multiply the value of the work I was already doing. Every new skill felt like another tool in my survival kit, only now it was for thriving. I experimented with social media campaigns, better product photography, and customer engagement strategies. Slowly, my business began to scale more efficiently. Orders increased, customer satisfaction grew, and I realized that investing in myself was just as important as investing in my business. The lessons from the streets, combined with new knowledge, were creating something powerful. With my business growing, I started thinking about long-term goals. I didn't just want stability anymore. I wanted impact. I wanted to create opportunities for others who were struggling like I once did. I began networking with local nonprofits and community leaders. I pitched ideas for partnerships, donation programs, and mentorship initiatives. Some said no, some were skeptical, but a few believed in the vision. Together, we created programs to help people find jobs, housing, and guidance. Seeing someone get their first paycheck after months of struggle was as thrilling as making my own first big sale. I realized that true success isn't measured in dollars alone. It's measured by the lives you touch.
One evening, after a long day of managing orders and mentoring sessions, I paused and reflected. The journey from my lowest point seemed almost unreal. I thought about the nights in my car, the eviction notices, the hunger, and the fear. I remembered the moments of despair when I felt invisible to the world. And now, here I was, owning a growing business, mentoring others, and sharing my story publicly. I allowed myself a rare moment of gratitude. I smiled.
I whispered to myself, "You made it." Not because life became easy, but because I never gave up. Every struggle, every tear, every sleepless night had led me here. And in that moment, I understood the true meaning of resilience. By this point, I began receiving invitations to speak at larger events. Local conferences, community gatherings, and even schools wanted me to share my story. Each speech started with my journey from homelessness, the immigrant struggles, and moments of betrayal. I spoke openly about the nights I cried alone and the mornings I forced myself to keep going. The audience listened, some nodding, some with tears in their eyes. It was humbling. It was validating. I realized that my story had power beyond my own life. It could motivate, inspire, and ignite hope in people who were facing their own battles. And every time I spoke, I felt my purpose solidifying. My pain was now a platform for change. Around this time, a surprising opportunity came from the media. A local news outlet wanted to feature my journey. I was hesitant at first, but I agreed, knowing it could reach more people. The interview was emotional. I shared the raw truth, the fear, the hunger, the isolation. I spoke about the tiny victories, the slow progress, and the lessons that shaped me. The story went viral in our community. Messages poured in from strangers, thanking me for being honest and vulnerable. For many, seeing someone overcome such hardships sparked a glimmer of hope. It reminded them that even in their darkest moments, change is possible. And I realized vulnerability could be one of the strongest tools for connection.
With increased visibility, my business began attracting more opportunities. Collaborations with other small business owners, media features, and mentorship requests became frequent. I realized I had built more than a business. I had built a platform to inspire, guide, and support others. I used every interaction to share lessons from my journey: patience, persistence, and perseverance. I reminded people that success rarely comes overnight, that setbacks are part of the process, and that every small step forward counts. I began keeping a journal of these lessons, planning to one day compile them into a guide for anyone trying to climb out of adversity. I felt a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced before. By now, I had a team helping me manage the growing business. I hired people who had faced their own struggles, giving them a chance to rebuild their lives. We shared a common understanding. Hardship taught resilience. The energy in our small office was electric. Everyone brought determination, creativity, and empathy. We celebrated even small wins together. First big order, first positive customer review, first expansion into a new product line. I watched my team grow alongside the business. It reminded me that success is amplified when shared. And each day, I felt more certain that my journey from homelessness, betrayal, and struggle had not only shaped me, but also empowered others around me. At this stage, I also began planning for long-term stability. Investments, savings, and emergency funds became a priority. I wanted to ensure that no future hardship could push me back to the edge. Financial literacy, which I had learned the hard way, became a cornerstone of my life. I created budgets, tracked expenses meticulously, and studied investment strategies. I even began offering workshops to others, teaching them what I had learned the tough way. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now teaching people how to avoid the struggles I had endured, and in doing so, I felt empowered, purposeful, and deeply connected to my mission.
As the second year of my business approached, I reflected on the incredible journey. From sleeping in my car to mentoring others, from struggling to eat to managing a growing business, it felt surreal. I remembered the doubts, the betrayals, the moments I wanted to give up, and yet I had persevered. Every sleepless night, every tear, every act of persistence had compounded into something meaningful. I realized that the challenges had taught me more than success ever could: resilience, patience, empathy, and self-belief. These were the true rewards. And for the first time, I felt completely ready for whatever the next chapter would bring. Around this time, I received an unexpected invitation. A prominent entrepreneurship podcast wanted me as a guest. They wanted to hear my story, my struggles, and the lessons I had learned. I accepted, nervous but excited. During the recording, I spoke honestly about homelessness, financial struggles, rejection, and my slow climb back. I shared the small victories, the mentors who guided me, and the lessons I had learned about resilience. Listeners responded immediately. Messages poured in, thanking me for sharing my raw journey. People said they felt inspired, motivated, and understood. I realized my story had reached far beyond my local community, and the impact was deeply humbling. After the podcast aired, opportunities multiplied. I began receiving requests to speak at workshops, schools, and community events across the state. I even got approached by small business incubators to share my experience with startups. Each invitation was a chance to amplify my message, to show that failure isn't final, that struggle doesn't define you. Your response does. Every time I spoke, I emphasized practical lessons, perseverance, strategic thinking, and self-belief. But I also shared the emotional side, the fear, the shame, and the courage it takes to keep going. People resonated with honesty and vulnerability, and I realized that the story I had once feared sharing was now inspiring and empowering countless others. By now, I had fully embraced my role as a mentor and leader. I wasn't just building a business anymore, I was building a community. A network of people who supported each other, shared knowledge, and inspired growth. We celebrated successes, learned from failures, and held each other accountable. I saw firsthand how providing guidance, resources, and encouragement could change lives. It reminded me of the kindness I received during my darkest days, and it reinforced my belief. No one succeeds entirely alone. Our struggles become meaningful when we use them to uplift others, and with each life I touched, I felt my own story gaining deeper purpose. I understood that true success was measured in impact, not just income. Around this time, I was approached by a local university. They wanted me to give a guest lecture on entrepreneurship and resilience. Standing in front of a room full of students, I shared my journey, from homelessness to business growth. I spoke about the sleepless nights, the fear of failure, and the small victories that kept me moving forward. I also shared actionable advice, how to set goals, manage finances, and develop mental toughness. The students listened intently, some taking notes, some nodding, and a few with tears in their eyes. It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I realized that my story had transformed into a tool for education, inspiration, and empowerment. As my visibility grew, I started to receive recognition from local media and community organizations. Awards, interviews, and features highlighted my journey and my work helping others. It was humbling to be acknowledged publicly, but more importantly, it validated the idea that one person's perseverance can create ripple effects. I thought back to the nights I doubted myself, to the fear and isolation of homelessness, and I realized that every hardship had built the foundation for this impact. Recognition wasn't the goal, but it reminded me that my story could serve as a beacon of hope for others navigating their own struggles.
By this stage, I had begun expanding my business beyond my local community. I explored e-commerce platforms, social media marketing, and collaborations with other entrepreneurs. The work was challenging, but my past had prepared me for it. Every obstacle felt manageable because I had faced far greater uncertainty before. I applied lessons from my personal struggles, resilience, patience, strategic thinking, to business decisions. Orders increased, and my brand gained a reputation for authenticity and reliability. And through it all, I never forgot my roots. I continued mentoring, volunteering, and giving back to the community that had supported me when I had nothing.
Success, I realized, wasn't just about growth, it was about staying grounded. As I looked ahead, I realized the power of storytelling. My personal journey, from homelessness, betrayal, and hardship to resilience and growth, had become my greatest asset. I began writing a series of articles, recording videos, and sharing insights online. People connected with authenticity and vulnerability. They wanted guidance, motivation, and proof that transformation was possible. I understood that my story could reach far beyond my immediate network. It could inspire, educate, and empower thousands of people. And each time someone reached out to thank me or share their own journey, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I realized my struggles had not been in vain. They were a bridge to help others rise. By now, I had fully embraced my role as a mentor, entrepreneur, and storyteller. I reflected on how far I had come, from sleeping in my car to facing daily uncertainty to building a thriving business and helping others along the way. The journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about purpose, impact, and leaving a legacy. Every setback had taught me a lesson. Every struggle had strengthened my resolve. And every connection I made had reminded me that we rise higher when we lift others. I understood that my life story wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who needed hope, courage, and proof that change is possible. Now, standing at this moment, I can see the full arc of my journey. From the despair of homelessness, rejection, and uncertainty to the empowerment of business success, mentorship, and community impact. I've learned that resilience isn't just enduring hardship, it's using it as fuel to grow, to inspire, and to transform. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt was worth it. Because today, I don't just survive, I thrive. And more importantly, I help others thrive alongside me. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Your past does not define you. Your choices do. Keep going, keep believing, keep building.